Alright, so today I'm going to talk about some jigs. I like throwing jigs a lot here in South Carolina, near Hartwell, Keowee, Murray. There's all lakes where docks at, and jigs are a really, really good way to efficiently attack docks. In rocks and docks and points, and just casting to them in the open. Anything, anywhere, a jig is a great thing to learn. First, I think it's important to know how to choose your jig color. Now, if there is more than 3 foot of visibility, there's not a lot of stain in the water, more about 3 or 4 foot, I'm gonna probably go with the green pumpkin base. I want a jig with the green pumpkin base, right? And I want a little bit of color in it. Whether that be something like this, which this is a Harrington Tackle Company 1/2 ounce. It's called it's just a green pumpkin with a little bit of orange in it. This is a really great jig. It's a lot of people throw these here on Hartwell. They really like this color. And I'll throw this anywhere from about 4 foot to 20, 30, 40, 50, however much water clarity you have. I'll throw this jig right here. Now something like this jig. This jig is called Hudson's Magic. There's a little bit of green pumpkin, a little bit of black and blue. This jig I'll throw anywhere if we have about 2 to 3 foot of visibility. Anywhere from there all the way to probably about 5 foot of visibility. That's the longest I'll throw. That's when I'll throw this jig right here. And both of these are the Harrington Tackle Company Hitter Series 1/2 ounce Arky style jig heads. And now, on certain lakes, like Keowee and some of those lakes that have really clear types of bodies of water, I'll throw something more along the lines of this. It's just a straight green pumpkin jig. And if you can get like a little bit of blue in it, I don't know if I have one in here. Sort of like this, just a green pumpkin. Not this much blue, but just a little bit of blue in there. That's usually gonna be perfect for that 10 foot of clarity and on. Now this is a 3/8 ounce Prosser Baits jig, which I cut it down to make it more of a finesse jig. That's usually about perfect for Keowee. Now another thing I like to do is find them on live scope. Whether I'm on a point or I'm in a ditch in the timber, I like to pan around my live scope, and if I see some, I like to cast to them. And usually you can get them to bite it doing that. And with that, I like to use in the wintertime these little tiny little finesse jigs. This is a 3/8 ounce tungsten brine thrift Fitzgerald fishing jig. Either that, or I'll go with something like this Harrington Tackle Company, but it has that orange and a little bit of the green pumpkin in it. And sometimes for those spotted bass, I think spots, they really like that chartreuse color. So when maybe summertime, or maybe when they're a little bit more active, I like to throw something a little bit of chartreuse. This is the Spotalicious. It's a Harrington Tackle Company 3/8 ounce Arky style jig. And this is just green pumpkin, a little bit of chartreuse in it. And I think those jigs pretty much cover you. Now, if there's less, which we don't get this a lot here in South Carolina, but if you have less than 3 or 4 foot of visibility and less, that's when you want to throw something like this, which is just a regular old black and blue jig. And then if it's really muddy, this seems to do pretty good. It's black and blue with just a little bit of chartreuse in there. After like a big rain or something, this jig, high price line to be using. Same with the Abrazex. I don't think you need to pay $30 a spool for some line, 30, 40. But the Invisex I use, but I use that on baits that like jerk baits. Baits I'm not gonna be putting into heavy cover stuff. Where there's not stuff that line can get little nicks and little knacks and little abrasions on. So that's my jerk bait. Some of my cranking stuff has some Invisex on there. You know, just stuff that's not all. Now all of my spinning rods, I like to throw 10 or 8 pound Sunline Sniper on. But we're not talking about spinning rods, we're talking about jig rods. So that's just what that's what I use the Invisex for, because the Invisex is a more supple, lighter line. But Red Label, it's a little more rigid. It's a little more abrasion resistant. So I always put my Red Label on things that I'm putting into cover. My jigs, my Texas rigs, my spinner baits. Anything that is going into the cover and is going to get little nicks and knacks on, I always use Red Label. Whether that be 20 or whether that be 17, I always have Red Label ready. So that's just my jig setup. That has worked for me. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Subscribe. Thank you. Throw the fish, and you want it to fall directly on their head, directly on top of them. Just give it as much slack line, keep the rod tip down, and just let it fall all the way down. And usually that fish will follow it. Now, if he doesn't follow it, reel it back in. But if he follows it, leave it down there for a second. Slowly pick up your slack. Now, don't do it fast. Just slowly reel in the slack. Slowly lift up on it. If you feel him, set the hook, reel him in. If you don't, drag it a little bit. If you still see him following it or he's still on it, just leave it for a second. If you don't get it, drag it again. You can drag it, you can hop it, but usually after about 2 hops or 2 drags and he don't want it, reel it back in. Cast to another one, go find some more. It's usually a good way to attack jig fish. Now, let's talk about rods and reels. I usually keep 2 jig rods. This one is a Stick 5. It's a 7'3" heavy fast. And I throw 20 pound Seaguar Red Label on it, and this is a Shimano Prado. Now, this is my heavy rod. This is why I'm skipping them 1/2 ounce jigs up under docks. I'm attacking cover with it. This is the rod I'm doing it with. Because of that, I want a 7-to-4 gear ratio, 7.4.1. What that's going to allow me to do is the lower the 6, you don't want a 6, a 7.2, like anywhere from like a 7.2 to a 7.4. You don't want a 6.4. That's too slow. You want a faster reel. I can throw it out there. I can be efficient. I want to be able to pick up that line, pick it up fast, and be efficient. But if you go to something like an 8, 1-to-1, 8-2-to-1, what that's going to do is you're not gonna get as much torque in the reel. So you're not gonna be able to set the hook and put a lot of torque on that fish. It's a higher gear ratio, but there's not a lot of torque in it. So I like that 7.4 on my Stick 5. I mean, it's a pretty stiff rod. Definitely want some backbone. And one thing is you want to try to set that reel as loose as you possibly can. That means you want to dial that tension knob back. You want to dial your centrifugal brakes in here, and you want to dial your knobs. You want those to be about as low as you can get them, as light as not on as you can get them. But skipping, we do get a lot of professional overruns. So you definitely won't want them too low. Just try to get them as low as you can. And if you're casting, if you're skipping, and you're knowing, and you see your bait is always landing higher than you want it to, what you want to do then is you want to, again, just lower it down a little bit, because the tighter, the more tension you have on this spool, the higher that bait is going to land. You can't get it low to the water to skip it. So I always keep that rod on my deck, ready to go. And I also keep something for finesse jigs. This is a Cashion 7-foot fast, medium heavy. It's not a heavy, it's a medium heavy. And I throw 17-pound Red Label on this line too, on this rod. Now you'll notice it's a shallower spool, so a little bit better for skipping. That shallower spool helps a little bit. But this is an 8-1-1. With your finesse jigs, you usually don't have as big of a hook in them. The hook's not a big, thick hook, so you're not needing to have to put as much heat on them when you set the hook. This is really solid rod. Most of my finesse jig fish come off this rod right here. This is a Daiwa with a Tula on it. Yeah, sweet little combo. Now, one thing I will say about line. So, I like Seaguar line. That's just my personal preference. That's what I like to throw. And one thing I like about Seaguar line is they have different. They pour their own line. They pour their own resins, but they have the InvizX. There's Basics. There's Red Label. There's InvizX. There's AbrazeX. There's Tatsu. I don't use the Tatsu. I think that's some high. It usually does pretty good. But if I had to pick just a couple colors and a couple jigs, if you're just gonna go buy about 3 or 4 jigs, I would get. Let's see here. I think I'd get a. Black and blue. And where's it at? Right here. So if I was just gonna buy maybe 4 jigs, I'd go with something like the Hudson's Magic and Arky. The Arky is the style of the head. So the Hudson's Magic. I go with something with a little green pumpkin, a little bit of orange in it. Again, in that Arky style head. I go with a black and blue jig with Arky style head, and a green pumpkin jig. That Arky style head. Those 4 jigs should cover you about anywhere you go in the country. Now, you keep hearing me say Arky style. So, an Arky style heads. That's just referring to the type of head that a jig is. So, here's your main type of heads. I'm gonna pull out a couple more here. So you have a ball head. This is usually a more finesse approach, usually a more finesse-y style jig. It's a little ball head jig. This is, it's good for skipping docks, really good for finesse fishing. I usually always get ball heads with my finesse jigs. Now this is an Arky. An Arky head, you can do anything and everything with it. It's really good for skipping because of flat surface. You can drag it along the rocks. you can swim it. If that's something, if you got a little grass in your lake or something, you can always swim your jigs. And there's a football style head. This is more of a head that you're going to use to just drag. You're going to drag this in points and ditches, and that's usually what you're going to do with the football head. If I could only get a couple jigs, I'd go with an Arky. Or if you're just learning how to throw jigs, definitely go with the Arky style head, because you can do about everything with it. Now, there's different styles of jigs. So these are the jigs that I usually throw here in South Carolina. Since we don't have a lot of grass, we don't get to do this often. And I don't know a lot about this, but you can also, these are swim jigs. I'm not going to go too far with them because I don't know a lot about them. But these are meant to hold your rod up, reel it, and just shake it. You usually swim those through like heavy cover and grass. One way to work, my favorite way to work a jig, or just a regular Arky style jig here, is I like to take it. I like to throw it out. I want it to, like, if I'm throwing a dock, I want it to hit the piece of cover. So if I'm looking at a dock, I'm gonna try to skip it up under there. If you can't skip, go along the side of it and just flip it right as close to that dock as you can get it. And you want it to fall. You want to make sure it is sunk all the way, and then it's really simple. You just lift your rod tip, just lift it a little bit, let it jiggle hop, and then just drag it along the bottom. Lift it a little bit, drag it along the bottom. I think that's about the best way to fish a jig. That's the way I've caught a lot of bass on it. That's the way I like to do it. And then another thing with that forward-facing sonar, if you have forward-facing sonar and you're wanting to go scope them, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your jig and your rod. You're gonna find them on forward-facing sonar, throw it out there. Alright, so you saw my video about jigs. So we got our jigs. We know what kind of jigs we're gonna be throwing. Know what kind of jigs we need to be throwing. We know the colors, know rod, reels, lines. Now let's talk about trailers. Trailers. That's a very important thing to have on a jig. It's trailers. Trailers. It's what gives the bait a little bit more action. Just to really always have a trailer on your jig. Now I choose my trailers. I choose them based on water clarity. I choose them based on the time of year. Are those fish moving? Are they active? Or are they not? There's a bunch of factors that go in to choosing jig trailers. Now, before we talk about jig trailers, we need to know what a jig trailer is. I know it seems pretty basic, but a jig trailer, gotta be a jig. All it is it's what goes on the hook of that jig, usually a creature bait, to give that jig more action. It has two little crawls right here. As we know, a jig imitates stuff. It imitates a crawfish. It can imitate bait fish. Just a good, nice little meal. So, for flipping jigs, for the jigs that we use, this is not swim jigs. That's a completely different category. I don't know a lot about. But for docks, just for casting stuff, these are the trailers I tend to use. For a bigger profile jig, if I'm wanting something have a big profile, usually going for big fish, I'm gonna throw these Rage Tails. Now this is in Candy Crawl. They have these appendages. They seem to kick really well. Caught some big fish on them. Now this usually goes on all my green pumpkin jigs, all my, you know, and that candy curl, my green pumpkins, sometimes my Hudson's Magic. That's what that goes on. Now this is the same thing. It's a Rage Tail, but it's a black and blue. This black and blue goes when there's dirty water, that 3 foot and less, like we talked about with the jigs, and that is what this is for. That goes in the back of there. You always want to bite down. Always want to bite down your jig plastics. Put them on there. Get them nice and even and straight. Very important. Now we're talking about wintertime. Finesse jigs. Stuff when those fish are not that active. We want to use these Yamamoto crawls. They're grubs. You can use Zoom grubs. You can use whatever grub you want. But this is a little Gary Yamamoto grub. Now this specific one is in watermelon black flake. It's the 5-inch double tail. And this usually goes on the back of all my finesse jigs. And now most of my jigs. Nice wintertime. I throw it in this color right here, and I throw it in green, what do they call it? Green pumpkin black flake. Those are the 2 colors I throw in. And if you're new to skipping, and that's what you want to go out and learn, I recommend you use something like these Crush City baits. This is called the cleanup crawl. But the back of these baits are flat. So what that does is it gives you a flat surface, allows you to skip it really, really well. I haven't had any issues with skipping any of these, but if you really want a good skip, get some of these Crush Cities. And I think that about covers jig trailers. If there's any questions, leave them down in the comments. Thank you. Leave a subscriber. Leave a sub. I said that wrong. Thank you.